these two again.
You fucker! Damn, that was awesome. But despite how awesome that was, there's still a problem. Polehammer has a problem. And the solution to this problem is largely opinion-based, and there's a lot of personal bias attached to it. Simply put, I'm calling this the Polehammer problem. What is the Polehammer problem? Polehammer is a good weapon. It's capable, effective, able to be very deadly. In fact, it's so good, some guy made a website called polehammer.net just to prove that the polehammer is the best weapon in the game according to numerical averages. And while I don't think this is true, especially not anymore, it's a show of the weapon's upsides in a way. In a vacuum, the scenario is cut and dry right here, but Chivalry 2 is not a vacuum, and there are more factors at play other than is polehammer good. For starters, each weapon is attached to a class or a few classes. Greatsword is available to Devastator and Officer. Messer is available to Raider and Crusader. Longsword is only available to Officer, which is a crucial balancing point for the weapon as it means the downsides of Knight are forced on the Longsword most of the time. And Polehammer is only available on Poleman on Footman. Which classes have access to which weapons is also a crucial balancing point. By Polehammer only being available to Poleman, Polehammer is also competing with the other class exclusive weapons, being Halberd and Spear. We're going to ignore the glaive because it is not class exclusive, as it is also available to Raider. For the sake of simplicity, let's pretend right now that you are only going to pick between these three weapons, Halberd, Spear, and Polehammer. What does each weapon have unique to one another? The Spear is the longest weapon in the game, it's really fast, has aggressive stabbing animations that are incredibly easy to land, it does good damage, it's very potent in team engagements, and the skill floor is very low, allowing anybody to really pick it up and use it effectively, similar to its use in history. Even if you're brand new to the game, the two-handed spear is incredibly easy to use, and if you're very experienced at the game, it's even worse. Halberd, on the other hand, is like the spear, with great range, great damage, and incredible team fighting capabilities, but due to its speed, it's much harder to use in the hands of a new player. It takes a lot more practice. It also has less range, despite what this little box says, and also unlike the spear is incredibly potent in a team fight, but can struggle against multiple opponents, which almost makes its potency justified as it has clear weaknesses in some areas. The Halberd, while a little bit more complicated to use, lacks this major downside against multiple opponents, which makes it much more capable in most scenarios. It does great damage, has great timing variation allowing for high-level mix-ups, has incredible reach, and is probably one of the best weapons in the game for team fighting. And on my tier list, I put it as the best weapon in the game for team fighting. Everything about this weapon is good, and the only thing that it could even struggle with is fighting a top-tier duelist, in duels specifically. It's good against every class in the game. Vanguard, Footman, Knights, they all die relatively quickly to Halberd, which leads to the problem. Polehammer is supposed to be a more potent, damaging weapon than Halberd, and this was true before Halberd got buffed in its Aberfell update. Now that Halberd got the buff, there's a very clear issue present. Halberd does almost everything better than Polehammer does in any meaningful capacity, all while being almost easier to use as well. The Polehammer also lacks a lot of defining characteristics. Comparing it to Heavy Mace, the Polehammer has the same light and heavy overhead damage, same light and heavy stab damage, and same heavy slash damage. Comparing Polehammer to the two-handed hammer, it has the same light and heavy overhead and the same heavy slash damage. Going back to Poleman, Polehammer is also the shortest, being more than beaten by Halberd and Spear. This leads it to be less contributing in a team fight, all while doing really not that much more damage compared to Halberd, other than a few specific attacks. For most of the attacks versus Halberd, it's a mixed bag, with the only attacks that really shine for Polehammer being its overhead and special attack. Out of all the polearm sprint attacks, Polehammer also has the worst of the group, with the least range, and usually the least damage. Polehammer is slightly faster than Halberd, but I would struggle to call it fast. And it also has hit stop, which makes fighting multiple opponents tricky. Hit stop can be an advantage, but it's easier to make use of when your weapon is fast, like rapier or mace or war club, but the polehammer is much slower, and it also comes with some baggage, such as the alt slash being really poor, a trait shared across all the polearms, but is much more exaggerated as the range decreases. On halberd, the alt slash is okay. On polehammer, it's not okay. Fucking holy shit, don't do that attack ever. Let's try talking about polehammer like this. What is polehammer meant to do compared to the halberd? Polehammer should be the Knight Slayer, and to a point, I can see that being the case. You trade range, the ability to cleave, and in some cases even damage for the ability to easily kill knights. Now, let's ask, does polehammer actually do this better than halberd? Yes. Yes, with an asterisk. The amount that polehammer does kill knights better than halberd is actually very small, to the point where you may question its validity, especially since while it has this benefit, it has a laundry list of downsides next to halberd. And now you have to ask yourself, is the small benefit we gain against knights worth the downsides we get? This is a much harder question to answer, so let's talk about the polehammer's upsides. It's faster than halberd, which does lend itself to a bit easier utility. The blunt damage does have some upsides in stamina damage, but this only comes through on a few attacks due to polehammer's lower base damage, and halberd's high damage compared with the chop bonus often results in higher stamina damage most of the time. The only attacks that really do more stamina damage on polehammer compared to halberd are its heavy overhead, heavy slash, and special attack. Polehammer does have really nice overhead damage that allows it to kill knights and footmen with a light and a heavy overhead, compared to halberd's 2 heavy overheads needed. But this comes with a trade-off to its stab, which halberd blows polehammer out of the water. Halberd's stab can kill every class in the game with ease, both light and heavy, and polehammer's stab can't even kill a non-overhealed archer in 2 stabs. What about the special attack? Polehammer does have a 100 damage special attack, and with the blunt damage bonus, makes it the second strongest attack in the entire game, reaching up to 135 damage on footmen and 150 damage to knights. This alone could justify polehammer's placement, but let's once again compare it to halberd. Halberd does 85 on its special. They're about the same speed, and halberd's is significantly easier to land due to its range increase. Halberd's special still does a lot of damage, and it makes me wonder, is polehammer's special actually that much better than halberd's? It is, but by how much? Does this justify the trade-offs? And in my opinion, I don't think it does. The entirety of polehammer is that it's falling behind halberd at almost every turn, rather than being a side grade like it should be. Now we return to the polehammer problem. Polehammer is a very good weapon. Halberd is the best team-fighting weapon in the game. Ask yourself, and keep in mind this does come down to your own biases, your own opinions, and there is no concrete answer to this question. Does polehammer deserve a buff so it's a competing option next to spear and halberd? Polehammer is a good weapon, and compared to the other options in the game, it's very good. But if you decided to play a polearm, what reason would you ever pick polehammer over spear and halberd? Variety? Because it looks cool? Because you like the sound effects? As far as an objective view of the game, these are not justifiable reasons for the state of the weapon. But should polehammer be buffed to be comparable to the halberd? Maybe. Over the past few days, I've been playing a lot of polehammer, and my opinion over how strong this weapon is has fluctuated and gone up and down quite a bit. I think there's real potential in its current state, but I keep asking myself, would I be doing better with another weapon? And the answer is a very simple probably. Now let's assume that you do think we should buff polehammer. If we are going to buff polehammer, what should be buffed? Buffing polehammer is very scary. I mean, just look at halberd. For anyone not playing the game since launch, halberd got a buff during the Aberfell update, and it increased the halberd damage by 5 on every attack. This made halberd go from mediocre to one of the best weapons in the game in a snap. So with the blunt damage bonus, I feel an air of caution is needed when buffing polehammer. My suggestion would be this. Buff the light stab by 5 damage. Buff the light and or heavy overhead by 5 damage, depending on how generous you're feeling. I would recommend the light overhead over the heavy overhead though, as I feel that buffing the heavy overhead could be a little bit too much. Why did I pick these? The light stab doing 5 more damage puts it at 45 blunt damage. 45 blunt damage puts it with the best stab out of any blunt weapon, which it probably should have given it's a polearm, and it actually is meant for stabbing. This change will make archers die in 2 light stabs if not overhealed, lets vanguards die in 3 stabs as opposed to 4, and increases its versatility by a lot by making the stab a much more dangerous option. Buffing the overhead by 5 creates a separation, giving it a unique damage value over the heavy mace and two-handed hammer, which currently share the same damage values as the polehammer. This also increases its stamina pressure by a lot and makes it a much more stamina-intensive weapon, adding some utility against the halberd. The light overhead would be a much better option for this at 55 damage instead of 50, as opposed to buffing the heavy overhead to 75 from 70. Regardless of if one or both of these are picked, putting the light overhead at 55 or the heavy overhead at 75 would add an in-between point between the two-handed hammer and heavy mace versus the maul, which the maul does 60 damage on a light overhead and 80 on a heavy overhead. Now, these buffs sound really scary, and if you're worried about polehammer becoming too strong or too scary when buffed, I can assure you that the blunt hit stop and having some issues like the bad alt slash will keep the weapon from ever fully becoming meta, but it will be a much more popular choice, I assume. I hope you can understand my thoughts and why I feel the way I do. I also feel that halberd could potentially be taken down just a little bit to be less potent, as I feel that halberd is a bit overbearing. If I could pick something to nerf on the halberd while I'm at it, I would reduce its light overhead damage by 5 and slow down its stab, without reducing the stab damage itself. This would not only be a unique change for halberd, giving it a slow but powerful stab, but it would also even out the weapon a little bit and give other weapons a little bit more utility. Hopefully someone at Tornbanner sees this video and agrees. Speaking outside of polehammer while I'm at it, there are a lot of weapons that need some looking into. 55 damage Messer Slash, 50 damage Highland Sword Slash, and Great Sword Slash. But surprisingly, I feel that the weapons in this game are actually very balanced overall. Most of the weapons in the game are actually very usable and have very good strengths compared to each other. Even polehammer, which I'm suggesting gets buffed, is still very good on its own. Regardless, I'm going to be using this weapon a lot more even if it doesn't get buffed, because it's fun. And sometimes it's fun just to play a weapon that doesn't get a whole lot of love. And there's a lot of weapons in this game with a lot to show off, and they're often overshadowed by things like the Messer, Longsword, Daneaxe, Greatsword. Maybe you should try something new for a few days, and you might be surprised to figure out what you can discover. I hope you liked this video. Be sure to like the video, leave a comment. The YouTube algorithm loves that sort of thing. I stream 5 days a week over at twitch.tv/ZiggyLada. I play Chivalry 2 a lot because I just love this game. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I hope I see you again.